So welcome everyone. I have here with me Alexandra Levit. Alexandra is the founder and CEO of Inspiration at Work. She's a global workforce author, analyst, consultant, and futurist. And today we'll be talking with Alexandra about the future of work in the metaverse. In the first series in our new episode, in a new episode of our new series on the future of work. So from now on until the end of the year, at least, we'll have one webinar each month on the future of work. So Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be the first guest in this series. My name is Alexandra Levit. You can call me Alex for short, and I am a workforce futurist. And that alone makes some people raise their hands and say, what is that? So just to level set, it's not as complicated as it sounds. A futurist is simply someone who looks at trends that are percolating up through the market, through society, through business, and tries to make an educated determination about what's likely to cause disruption in the near future. And there are all different kinds of futurists, and most of us have some degree of training in what's called strategic foresight. But the area that I focus on is the future of work. And I've been in this field for about 20 years now. And what makes that fascinating is the only real way to know if you're good at foresight, even though we do have a scientific process, is to wait, is to make some forecasts and then see what happens. And so over time, not only do you learn if you have kind of a knack for it, but you also are able to recognize patterns from the past and use them to help prepare for what's coming next. And that's really my goal. And that's why we're here today, is because the metaverse, in fact, is something that's going to be coming next. Whether it's going to become widespread and immersive in 5 years, it's going to be 10 or 15, it will come. And so it is in our best interest, of course, to be professionals, leaders, people who are looking out for such things, to understand what it is, where it's going, and what you need to do to be ready. So that's our goal here today, and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you. So I think it makes sense to start with the obvious question of what is metaverse? Is that virtual reality? If not, what's the difference?
Yeah, very, very good question to start out with. This is fascinating, actually, because metaverse as a term was created by a novelist, Neil Stephenson, science fiction novelist, in 1982, which is crazy if you think about it. The novel was called Snow Crash, and it's about a virtual world that people live and work in and even do cop chases in. Which I love that part. Anyway, the metaverse means that there is a convergence of physical and virtual space that is accessed through a computer medium and enabled by very immersive technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And together, these forms of alternate reality are referred to as extended reality. So that's what the metaverse is. Virtual reality is a component of it. It's an important component. We're going to be talking about VR and where it currently is today a lot in the next 60 minutes, because that is what we know when we think of the metaverse right now.
So where is the metaverse at right now? Because, well, from what I'm familiar with, Facebook, they even rebranded as Meta,
Mhm.
and there was this huge hype, and then it kind of disappeared. So what do you think
Yes.
about that?
That is what I hear most commonly, that the metaverse was a fad. And it was something that everyone was interested a couple of years ago in. And then the attention of the world seemed to shift, at least with respect to the future of work, to generative AI, which we can also talk about. Generative AI is a very important development when it comes to how we're doing work in the future. But the metaverse is also, it's still very, very relevant. And I'll explain why. I think that thanks to books and movies, like one of my favorites, Ready Player One, I'm not sure how many people have read that or seen that. We have this version of the metaverse as this parallel reality of the entire physical world. So it's duplicated essentially. And this has obviously, if you've ever played in the metaverse, not come to fruition. But we have to remember that the metaverse in its infancy has actually existed in the gaming world for a really long time now. It's very routine if you're a gamer to create a digital character and avatar, move them through a 3D space, and what the holdback is in terms of moving this from being a game to being real life is that the technology is not immersive enough and it's not widely accessible enough to facilitate everyday engagement. It's one thing to play a game for a couple of hours and like, oh, it's a novelty, I'm doing something for fun. It's another to replace real life activities in the metaverse. And a lot of people do not have the gear. A lot of people do not have the access. So you can't really mandate that people participate in this way when there's still such barriers to entry. So we still see it fairly limited in the gaming world, but we also have to remember that the gaming world is an industry that's worth hundreds of billions worldwide. So this is not a small thing. If you talk to any kid, most kids have had access to the metaverse for quite some time now. And the version, of course, distinguishing from virtual reality is a component of the metaverse that kids are accessing via their games. But this already exists. It's just a matter of making some changes and finding some fixes that we're going to talk about today. What needs to happen in order for the metaverse to become more immersive and more widely accessed?
So that's actually my next question. What are the only barriers just those technical aspects, the fact that not everyone has a, I don't know, HD camera or a computer fast enough? Is that why Meta did not succeed?
Well, I mean, I think we definitely do need to talk about the downsides. I mean, I know we're also going to talk about successful examples of work that's happening in the metaverse. Again, still sort of an isolated example here and there. But there is definitely a downside. And people often ask me, could we use the metaverse right now to be a replacement for Zoom if, let's say, God forbid, another pandemic happened, or there was some kind of, I mean, in the US right now, we have these crazy wildfires in California. There's going to continue to be significant climate related disruptions in the upcoming decades. So, are we going to have a need for remote distributed work still? Absolutely. But if I'm being very, very honest with you all, I don't think the metaverse is there yet. Um, Metaverse people who are on the bandwagon will tell you that VR environments now can virtually recreate in-person collaborative experience just like real life. Um, but the way that users interact with this technology today does not make them conducive to lengthy engagement. And here are a few examples of that. First of all, the 3D controllers that you have to use, they're not as easy to use as, let's say, a mouse or a touch screen even. And this can result in some pretty frustrating performance for even the most basic tasks, like clicking on an icon, for example. Also, a lot of them, like the Apple Vision Pro, rely on eye-based engagement. And this can cause a lot of eye strain. It can cause fatigue. It can cause headaches. And another really significant hurdle that I don't think people talk about a lot is something that's called cybersickness. And cybersickness, it sounds like very futuristic, right? But it's essentially just visually induced motion sickness that is commonly observed with virtual reality use. And when I say commonly, we're talking around 25%, that's a lot. That's like 1 out of every 4 people experiences this because the technology is not immersive enough. It still feels like you're playing a game more than actually being there. And the primary cause of this is that your eyes are having one set of input and your ears, your inner ear is not. So this results in something called visual vestibular mismatch. The things that your eyes are telling you doesn't match what your ear is telling you with respect to whether you're physically moving your body. So this is actually a huge hurdle that, again, I think it speaks to the larger question of how can this technology be more immersive? Because if you truly feel like you're there, you're not going to have these mismatches in your body. But right now, we're not. And a full quarter, some people say even more, of people who use this technology cannot do it. they take the goggles off, they immediately stop because it makes them feel so physically unwell. And we can't talk about the future of the metaverse without talking about some of these current challenges.
So that's actually a perfect description of me. I get motion sickness in video games. I just can't play them.
Yeah.
So if you could actually just paint a picture of how do you see the metaverse? Like, okay, I'm logging in and do I see avatars? Do I see apps? You said clicking on icons. So just kind of describe this to us, please.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start with kind of a general sense of what I've seen when I've participated in work-related metaverse environments, and then I'll give some specific examples of work that's being done in the metaverse today, because I think people don't realize that this, similar to the use of AI, is not an all or nothing proposition. The technology is evolving, so you might even be using it a little bit already and not realize it. The way that I've used the metaverse, it really does still feel like I'm moving my character around a video game landscape. Even though I might be attending a conference where I'm moving my avatar, I'm walking it into the building, I'm saying hello to someone, my character is saying hello to someone who's standing there. I go and I sit down in a conference room with other people. There's a speaker on the stage, but I don't feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm playing a game. And again, there's that I guess, psychological barrier, where I still feel very much like Alex Levit sitting at the computer or sitting at the phone. I don't feel like I'm actually in that conference. Whereas I think the future of the metaverse really is that we see a much more seamless, you almost can't tell sometimes when you're in one and the other, and that'll bring up a whole bunch of other psychological issues that we probably won't broach on today. But yes, that's what my experience is. And I want to give a few examples of what's happening in the metaverse now with respect to work. First of all, there's a couple of different really cool services where you can rent office space in the metaverse, similar to how you would a couple of years ago during the pandemic, and even before that, I would think WeWork was a very popular global option for coming and renting a room with some technology that you could do your remote work from. And Clockwise is an offering that is basically 2025's answer to WeWork. Also, I'm very familiar with a company called Verbella, which is a pioneer in this space. They host a variety of different types of work environments through their metaverse platform. And they're using it for a lot of things. You can have networking events, you can have entertainment, such as concerts, and you can even have a large conference with breakout sessions that I will say are typically a bit more immersive than your average Zoom session, although again, it does still feel like you're not physically there. Um, and I will say that even now, the metaverse is better at replicating hands-on experiences. So things like training can be more easily mastered and then revisited if you need a refresher later. So for example, in the hospital setting, surgeons are using operating scenarios in the metaverse all the time to learn and practice very risky procedures. And for the same reason, the metaverse is the best place right now for disaster planning, because you can simulate dangerous events without putting anyone in harm's way. Companies are also using the metaverse to extend and expand their global talent pools, because you can do something like have a remote expert from anywhere in the world in the field with your employees, helping to instruct them on a rare process or a new process that ordinarily you would need to find someone located in your geography to do this. And now, because the metaverse has simulated a virtual environment, you can have that person access your employees from afar. And I actually think one of the most fascinating current examples, and when I say current example, this is not brand new. This has been in the works for several years now, but is the country of Singapore. Singapore has, like all countries, a variety of problems. One of their problems is scarcity of land, trying to figure out what areas are most at risk of flooding. And so what the government did was it built a very detailed digital twin, like down to the street level, to prototype and test new solutions across their various government agencies. And this has been fascinating to see what they've done with this over time, because they're progressively working toward making this digital twin more available to everyone in the public. So let's say you want to go and visit Singapore. Well, you can't afford to fly there. Well, if you're from somewhere else in the world, you could access Singapore in the metaverse, and it does look remarkably like Singapore if you were to visit in real life. Again, the immersive experience is still not quite there, but this is the future where entire countries and institutions and schools and workplaces will be simulated in the metaverse. And then a final suggestion that I want to offer about how this is being implemented today: vehicle manufacturers, automotive, aerospace, they're using metaverse-based digital twins of their products, so that they can experiment with R&D and take it perhaps a little bit further and do it a little bit more cheaply than, let's say, if you had to replicate all those materials in the physical world. So this is happening. It's definitely happening. It's just kind of in pockets right now. And I hope that the last couple minutes have helped to crystallize what it actually looks like in reality at the moment.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. Um, by when do you think would be more common? Next 5 years, 10 years,
I think
30?
that definitely before 30 years, for sure. I mean, people always try to get me to, I mean, let's put it this way. When I was talking about in my book, Humanity Works, about the distributed workforce, this book was published in 2018. So at that time, we were anticipating some sort of major disruption that would lead society to move more toward distributed and remote work. So this was in 2018. My time horizon then was within 5 to 15 years. Well, we saw it happen 3 years after that book was written. So I think really this is going to depend a lot on the disruptions of the natural world, or consequences that humans have potentially imposed on ourselves, or things like a disease that can't be necessarily anticipated. I think that will influence the speed with which technology is developed and implemented. And if we think back to, and this is what futurists do, we try to look at past patterns and make a guess about, based on what happened in the past, what's likely to happen in the future. And video conferencing was a very latent technology for almost 3 decades. Video conferencing existed for a very long time before most people started using it. In fact, I remember people specifically saying prior to the pandemic, "Oh, I'm aware of video conferencing. I hate it." And you know what? Most people are still not huge fans of it, but everyone uses it, that's for sure. And so I think we're going to be looking at something like that. But I'll still go back to my original time horizon of, for the metaverse, 5 to 15 years. And I think it'll be hastened by external events. So how fast it goes will absolutely depend on societal need. And I think there absolutely will be. I mean, one of the things I like to tell people as a futurist is, like, if you think COVID was the last major disruption in your lifetime, we wish. I mean, the people in California are already seeing that COVID was not their most major disruption, and when we see these climate events increasing in severity and frequency. So we've just, again, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but the metaverse is something that we need to be thinking about. And I'm happy to talk about ways we can begin preparing for this future, because there are kind of some specific things that you can do now.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What can we do?
So my main suggestion here, it's going to sound very scientific and very like, oh, we need a futurist to tell us that, but don't be the last ones there in the metaverse. So the metaverse participants in 2025 are still pioneers. Okay. So most people are not, most companies, most government institutions not playing in this space. Nevertheless, the virtual real estate market is booming. It is booming just as quickly as the physical real estate market, and it's worth almost as much money, which is crazy. People are purchasing, they are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for plots of virtual land. So this market has really expanded. And there are several different providers. There's Decentraland, there's Sandbox, there's Voxels, there's several. And if you're a leader of a company, you actually wouldn't be the first company to establish a presence in the metaverse. HSBC, which is a bank, they just acquired land in the Sandbox for a corporate presence. Stores like one of my daughter's favorites, Forever 21, operates a virtual store in the virtual world Roblox, which is very popular with younger people. So they know where their audience is and they're there. And what is a good idea to do at this point is just have a presence and allow your people to experiment with it. I don't think you can really mandate at this point. I mean, you might try, but trying to mandate that people work in this platform, I think is tricky, especially if you are not of the flexible nature. And I know a lot of organizations now are more flexible in terms of how they work, but if you are mandating a specific amount of use per day, that's probably not going to work out well, given, again, some of the limitations that we see from a physical perspective and from an access perspective. But I don't really think you can go wrong here. I think that if you establish a presence, you allow people to experiment, it's not like your investment is going to go away. Just like the real physical world with real estate, the investment's only going to become more valuable over time. In fact, I'm just an individual, but I was considering how I could purchase some land in the metaverse, knowing that things are going the way I think they're going. And then, of course, the $1 million question is, well, I don't know what to do here. I don't know how to purchase land in the metaverse. I don't know how to build something in the metaverse. I don't know how to get people to engage in it. And this is 1000% fair. So what I would say is this could be simple as hiring an experienced professional, even from an adjacent field like gaming, VR gaming, somebody who knows that world. And once you begin launching operations in the metaverse, you can slowly start to contend with big picture issues. There are going to be things, if you're bringing the metaverse environment into a corporate IT environment, I mean, there's all the fun stuff like interoperability. Does it work with your existing IT systems? How do you ensure user and data privacy when you add this component? How do you create sustainable business models? These are all really valid concerns. So what I would say is outsource where necessary, the technology component of this. And then while you have some time, start thinking about these big picture issues. And this can be part of a larger discussion on strategic foresight and how to be more prepared for the future of work in general. And this is obviously not the only issue that we need to be thinking about. But one thing that I found is if you start early on some of these things and you really gather a group of diverse constituents to brainstorm and talk through, okay, what are some potential scenarios and what can we do to at least feel like we're not going to be behind if such and such a thing happens, which I think one thing I hope everyone learns from the pandemic is that these things can and will happen. And it's in our best interest to not be scrambling. I mean, the companies that were able to adapt to distributed work very quickly were the ones who came out most successful in the end. And I think the key today is to not go backwards with kind of drilling down or doubling down on the in-person work, which globally we do see as a trend this year. We see that people our leaders are being like, I want everybody back in the office. Well, that might be nice in theory, but that's probably not where we're going. So as a society. So I think it's fine to facilitate human-based collaboration. It's really important for relationship building. And I'm not saying you should never have people in the office or never have, even when the metaverse becomes mature, we don't really know what the breakdown, what the balance is going to be of these two things. And that's okay to not know. I think a lot of this is going to be trial and error. Like, oh, okay, well, we had everybody work for 8 hours in the metaverse, even though it became immersive and people still felt really disconnected, even though they felt like they were there. We don't know what these issues are going to be. But I think having that platform to start and just getting people to go in and see what they do with it will be exciting for some people. And you can engage, as I mentioned, not only an established professional in the gaming world to help you out, but also your young people. And I don't want to get into like generational stereotypes or anything and say like, oh, all Gen Zs love to experiment with technology, because that's not the case. Humans are individuals. But you do find that people who are interested in gaming, I bet would be all over helping you with this kind of stuff. So engage your younger folks that are into gaming and say, hey, we want to create a game-like experience and see what happens. So I know that was a lot, but I have a lot of ideas on this topic. So
So if we're looking at the metaverse as a disruptive technology, which
right.
industries do you see being impacted the most, like in a good way? And then are there going to be industries that will be destroyed or jobs that will be lost, especially the non-technological ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is going to be my same answer because people ask me about AI all the time with respect to the same question. And I think my answer is ultimately, I think more jobs are going to be created than destroyed. And the reason is we don't know what new types of work are going to be facilitated by this technology. So I'll give people a very clear example. So 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a social media manager or, an online engagement specialist. Why would you need that? There was no online engagement. There was a whole category of jobs and careers that was created around the advent of social media. And social media is only one component of digital transformation. It's just one area. I mean, in all areas of digital transformation, there are jobs that are occurring. The other thing that's happening, and this is relevant to those of you who are asking about AI, whenever you insert an advanced technology like generative AI into a traditionally human-driven process, you still need a person to design the technology's role, to oversee it, manage it, fix it when it breaks, figure out if it needs to be redeployed, explain how it works to decision makers, explain what insights it's coming up with and how they've been validated. I just named about 7 jobs that are created by the use of an advanced technology. So if you think about the the net loss or gain of jobs, I think ultimately we're going to see jobs grow and job opportunities grow. Now, of course, the question in everyone's mind, though, is what about the people who can't upskill, who aren't able to, let's say, if you're a retail worker and you're working the cashier right now, so you're a frontline worker, and you're not able to learn that there are ways that you can work with the AI, let's say in your store, to make customer recommendations and use it to actually enhance your role as a human in the scenario. Those people are the ones that I'm worried about. I'm not worried about universally everyone because I think the jobs will be there. It's going to be a matter of matching the jobs that are available with the talent that's available and making sure that the talent has the right training. And in some cases, it could be very, very simple training. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Deep Talent that talks about a concept called talent intelligence, whereby AI is used to determine the potential of an individual, not the specific skills, but based on their profile, what could they potentially do? So this is a solution to the problem that I'm posing, which is we've got to have all these people, some of whom are in industries that are going to become obsolete. Even low-level tech workers are in this category. How do we find these people, learn what their adjacent skills are, and then move them into some of these new career categories? And talent intelligence uses AI to do just that. You asked about industries where this is going to boom. I mean, I already cited a couple: healthcare, manufacturing, automotive, anything where you can simulate a real world environment with less risk and less cost, I think is where it's really going to start. And then, of course, there's the entertainment component of this. We already see that with gaming. Hospitality is a little bit of another tricky one. I mean, that could and probably will be the biggest development, provided, again, all of this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning with how can the technology become more immersive? How can it be less less jarring from a physical perspective? And people are not going to want to go to the metaverse version of Vegas instead of actual Vegas unless it's going to feel pretty good for them. And if it doesn't, it's not going to work. So I think those are the industries that will be hottest. And I think right now we see the greatest utility in ones where you can simulate real world environments and real world product development. It's a great question.
So you mentioned an AI scanning a person and then determining which job they should do. which sounds kind of scary to me. Like I see the potential, but I also see the downside of this. And let's talk about the security risks because I think they're quite significant with this.
Well, I mean, let me just explain a little bit more what I mean by talent intelligence. So what I mean is that somebody puts a profile on a site. So they opt into it, and you're not, it's not taking like a body scan of the person or anything. It's really just evaluating their profile, their CV, and based on the skills and the experiences that are identified in the CV, the AI makes connections about what jobs might be appropriate. So one of my favorite examples of this is an organization that was looking for customer service representatives. These are notoriously hard to staff. There's very high turnover. And what they learned was people who were good in these customer service roles had previously been very successful bartenders. And if you think about what the skills associated with bartending are, they are very similar skills that are necessary for customer service representatives. Things like good interpersonal skills, problem solving, talking to people in an empathic way. And the AI was able to point this out in a way that a human reviewing a resume would be like, well, I don't see how bartending experience has anything to do with customer service reps. I mean, we want somebody who's been a customer service rep for 10 years already. Problem is like there aren't a lot of those people. So you've got to look broader. And from a privacy perspective, I mean, I think it's really no different than anything else we've got today. When you put your information online, you are to some degree sacrificing your privacy. You are inviting organizations that you're applying to look into your background, to look into your social media. And I don't see this necessarily going away. Where we do have to be much more careful is in the workplace in particular, when we are collecting data, when we are monitoring employees and what they're doing. And we have not, and this could be a whole other topic for a webinar, we have not sufficiently outlined how we are collecting data, what we are collecting, why we're doing it, and allowed people to opt in an informed way. We are doing a lot of things with employees without being super transparent about what we're doing. And this is a grave error. And as AI begins to take shape in more organizations, there's only going to be more stuff revealed about people. So we really need to have, and this too could be another topic for a webinar, but we need to have a very solid data management collection strategy, and very hard and fast ethical guardrails around the development of AI-based technologies, because privacy is such a risk. And I don't think that's really at the forefront of people's attention right now. It's more about, ooh, how can we use generative AI, for example, to grow business? And that is fine to be experimenting with, but when people's livelihoods are involved, we really do have to have a method to the madness. And even some huge companies I see are implementing AI-based initiatives without a governance strategy. And this is not, unfortunately, it's not uncommon, but it's not the best practice for sure.
Yeah, I definitely see how if everyone starts working in the metaverse and every motion, every minute that we're working or not working or just scrolling on TikTok is being
Mhm.
monitored, I see how it's just really impacts the way that our
Yeah,
employer feels about
yeah.
us. For example, he could say, "Hey, Alex, you've been scrolling on TikTok for 50 minutes out of the 8 hours you were supposed to work today."
And
Um,
that's already happening now. I mean, I think something like 60% of employers are monitoring their people in some way, whether it's monitoring the websites they visit, how long they spend in a particular application, how long they're logged in. Badging is something that's become very popular, where we are tracking when people come in, we are tracking when they leave. Um, so companies are almost as a matter of principle are like, we want people in the office, so we're going to track exactly how long they're in the office, which is debatable from a utility standpoint, if you ask me. But one of the things I talked about actually in my book, Humanity Works, that I mentioned before, was this kind of employee monitoring on steroids that I think will be possible in the near future. And what I mean by that is there will be significant advances in our ability to monitor people's performance in their job. So, for example, if you've got an AI bot who is overseeing your customer, let's just use the customer service example, the customer service calls that you're making, that AI can make an educated suggestion to your manager about how effective you are on those calls relative to your peers who are making the same types of calls. How many calls are you making? How often are the issues sufficiently resolved? And you can get a pretty objective portrait of your own performance, and your manager obviously can as well. So there are all sorts of problems associated with this, not the least of which is privacy and psychological impact. But the reason I'm talking about it here is I do think this is going to be a reality sooner rather than later, because companies are going to have the ability to do it. Why wouldn't they do it? It's like, oh, but we don't want to invade people's privacy. It's like, but they'd rather be more financially successful and more productive. So, I mean, one of the downsides, I guess, of foresight is you have to remember that everybody's kind of self-interested at the end of the day. And while there may be components of altruism and wanting to do the right thing, we still live in a capitalist society by and large, which means that the profit is going to be what people are after. And so I just think we need to be prepared and think about, okay, if we know businesses are going to go in this direction once they have this technology in their hands, like how can we implement it responsibly? And how can we, as an organization, have an ethical compass around this? So we're doing what we know is best for our people. And this is also an area where consulting with an expert can be really, really helpful. It's like, okay, well, let's say you want to implement a new employee monitoring technology, and you would not be alone. There are, as I said, more companies doing this than not. Talk with someone who knows what they're doing and just say, look, I have this concern, I have this concern. And that person has most likely dealt with these concerns before and can help you do this in a responsible way. But as the technology evolves, we will have the ability to do more and more invasive things. So it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind right now.
So on the other side of things, how can employees embrace the metaverse? How can we use it for our benefit rather than just being tracked all the time, I guess, and
Yeah,
monitored?
I mean, I think just experiment with it. Like go into one of these platforms, create an avatar, walk around, play some tennis, um, go sit in a attend a conference, sit in a meeting. And I think that most people will come to the conclusion that I've come to over the last few years, which is like, it's kind of novel, it's kind of fun to check out. Um, Not really something I'm interested in doing on a daily basis. I don't want to sit at a virtual desk and do my work. Why don't I just sit at my real desk and do my work? But just to know what I'm talking about, I think is incredibly valuable, which could take an hour to look into these platforms and just go and experiment and participate and just see what I mean firsthand about some of the challenges. Like you, for example, you've played in it a little bit with VR and you know that it makes you sick. Well, that's a really good thing to know up front. And if you're a person who's forward thinking and you want to drive participation in your organization, then you've got to kind of be on the forefront of saying to yourself, well, I don't know how this is going to work for me personally. I have these concerns and those need to be something that you're considering kind of for the larger population that you're looking at. So I think having personal experience and being able to go from there is really great. And the options are out there. And you don't have to purchase hundreds of thousands of dollars of real estate right off the bat. I think it's a good, and by the way, sorry for using dollars instead of euros or pounds. Or I know you were a global audience. Just that's my natural inclination is to talk in US dollars, but I know uh, hopefully you all know what I mean. It's a lot of money to purchase land in the metaverse right now, but not as much as the physical world. And again, I think your investment's going to be worth it.
So, and in terms of the benefits for the
Hmm.
employees,
Hmm.
you mentioned before that basically someone can work remotely, which is something that we're already doing,
Yeah.
but in new professions, like
Hmm.
you mentioned, I think the mining company.
Hmm.
So other than just breaking geographical boundaries. What
Yeah.
else could be the benefits for workers, not now, let's say in 5 years, 10 years?
And the training, absolutely. That you can train in low risk scenarios. You can try different things out. Hopefully, when it's more immersive, it can feel like you're doing it, but without the risk to your real life situation. I think will become huge. And just to have a better idea of the scenarios that you might face in a future career or future job. This can be anything from safety issues to really complex management decisions as we're training people to lead companies. And these are things that right now most people have to learn the hard way because they're unable to fully experience the situation until they're in it in real life. And the metaverse could drastically change this. And in fact, it could have implications for all sorts of things in our lives, for personal experiences as well. I also think the opportunity to understand what I talked about. I mean, I've talked about this for many years now, something called global competence, which I think is really important for an audience like this. I think to some degree, I'm preaching to the choir talking to this audience about global competence, but it refers to your ability to understand how business is done in different cultures and how that relates to what you're talking about. So understanding just from a global perspective, how your work is perceived, the impacts that it has, how it changes from culture to culture, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the opportunities. And right now, there's really no way to gain global competence unless you're going to go live in another country for 6 months or 6 years and learn it firsthand. Well, that experience is out of reach for most people. So the metaverse could make it so you could do it next week. If you want to go and work in Japan for in a metaverse environment in Japan, well, all of a sudden there are not as many barriers. So you mentioned geographic barriers, and yes, that's true literally, like you can go and visit other countries virtually, but also you can gain that global competence by being able to have that real, it's not real world, but like a real type of experience by having experience and extended time spent there. It's a great question.
That's really cool. I think at this point we'll move to the questions from the crowd.
Okay.
So one question was, as an individual, what would you do with purchased land in the metaverse? An experiment, an advert, an investment?
Well, I can tell you what I am going to do as an individual is I'm going to purchase office space in Clockwise, um, and I'm going to use it. I'm not going to completely replace my home, physical home office. I mean, you need to have somewhere from which you can operate the technology, first of all. It's not like going into with Ready Player One. I don't know how many people have seen it or read it, but you go into like this little box and you do it from there. Like you still need to be sitting at a computer to or a phone
Que
to
vous avez
to be.
peut-être une. Je vais devant.
Oh, I think somebody came off mute. Did somebody come off mute? Oh, okay, back on
Oh,
mute.
please go ahead.
Um, so anyway, just purchasing an office and then like walking around the environment, see who else is there, talk to them a little bit, and you can talk to them, depends on the platform, but you can talk to them via typing to them, shouting to them, or you could actually be using your voice and talk to their avatar and just experience what it's like to kind of sit down in a conference room and you can invite other people to meet you. So let's say you have a scheduled Zoom meeting, or let's even use this webinar as an example. Like we could do this webinar easily in the metaverse. Now, would it be more immersive than this? Yes. I do think it would be more immersive than this. I don't think it's not going to feel like you're in a room with me, though. So I think we're in that kind of, like I said at the beginning, in that intermediary stage where it's going to have somewhat limited utility from a work perspective. But just to see what it's like, I think as an individual, just go in and um, you can also you can join some of these platforms as a free member and just go in and check it out, do a trial. You don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars purchasing land if you don't even know what it is. So I think just as an individual, going in and experimenting yourself is a great idea.
Another question from the crowd was, doesn't the calculating power required to create a large-scale metaverse that does rendering in real time create an unacceptable energy drain?
Oh, I love this question because you know what? This is something that it relates to the development and execution of AI-based technologies as well. AI-based technologies too, similar to Metaverse, require an enormous amount of energy and power that rightfully some people, but not that many, are asking, where are we going to get this energy from? And to be very honest, I'm not totally sure of the answer. It's computing power, it's raw energy. I mean, there is a lot required to get these systems off the ground. And I do think we are going to see, and we're already seeing advances in computing power, but we only have so much energy in the universe. So our ability to harness that energy using technology, using what we know, I think that that potentially does have the ability to really slow things down, not just from a metaverse perspective, but from an AI perspective as well. And I think I love that you asked this question because I do not see people similar to data governance. I don't see people talking about either one of these things as much as they should be. Like, okay, well, if we're going to deploy this generative AI on a massive scale, like how are we powering it? And if we're going to develop our own algorithms and start using AI-based technologies as true strategic partners, how are we powering them? And this is a legitimate concern. So I'm very, very glad you asked that. I don't have a solution for you, but I do think it's something too that we absolutely need to keep in mind. I want to validate your feelings about it because I'm not really sure how we're going to handle it either. Although I will say, this is kind of an aside. When I was talking about distributed work back in 2018, one of the issues that I thought was going to be a big deal that turned out to be a nothing burger was bandwidth issues. I thought if we all moved to Zoom collectively, we didn't know it would be Zoom at the time, but as a society, I was really concerned with how everyone would be able to be online at the same time using all these different apps. I was concerned that it wouldn't be possible. And I have to say, like that ended up not coming to fruition. Everybody moved online relatively seamlessly, and for the most part, I mean, we're here today. It's working great. So that didn't come to fruition as much as I thought it was going to be an issue. And this might turn out to be the same thing. Maybe we're able to harness the computing power, harness the energies. Maybe there'll be new developments in these domains. But I will say this is something that concerned me about distributed work as well. I didn't think we were going to have the computing power to do this either, and we seem to be doing just fine. So not everything is negative in the foresight world. Sometimes things positively surprise you.
You. Okay, another question was, can you talk a bit about how Gen AI is being used increasingly to generate 3D environments for XR and the impact of that?
How generative AI is being used to, I mean, I'm sure this is what we see with generative AI is that there's all sorts of use cases being developed. And in the workplace, what we're primarily seeing right now with generative AI is how it can be used to invite people to get out of their kind of manual routine tasks and offer a more strategic perspective on their role. So, for example, my favorite example of generative AI and its impact is I write or have written over the last several years columns for the Wall Street Journal. And generative AI today, it's not that great, but it can write the columns. So what do they need me for? Well, they need me for things like interviewing and fact checking and making sure that the information is put together in a sensible way that sounds hopefully like a person with expertise wrote it. So they still need a person involved in that process. And that, by and large, is what we see companies grappling with today with generative AI. Like, okay, we'll put it in. We're not exactly sure the business utility of it, and the productivity benefits have not really been realized quite yet. In the sense that I think leaders have these expectations that I put in Gen AI, I invite employees to experiment with it, and by next year, we're going to have these significant productivity gains, and that's just not going to be the case. This is going to take a long process. But with respect to rendering 3D environments, I mean, there again, the ability is there, and generative AI can be used as a strategic partner in this. It's more just those 3D environments just don't feel immersive enough. So I think it's absolutely going to be a friend and a partner to us in building these, building them out to be more realistic, building them out to test scenarios that could potentially happen. I think Gen AI has um, or AI-based technologies in general have great utility here for being able to anticipate outcomes that we might not think of based on the existing variables. So scenario planning in the metaverse can be a way of using AI intelligently in that way. So, but I think by and large, my point with AI is that it's very much still in the tinkering phase. And if you bring it into your organization, you've got to be prepared that it's going to be business as usual for the foreseeable future, next couple of years, while people figure out, okay, how can I actually use this to help me do my job better? And by the way, I call that applied technology skills. It's part of an overall career profile of career durability, meaning that you can work successfully and gainfully over time despite external disruptions. You have the right skills. Applied technology skills mean you're aware of the technology that's available in your purview, and you understand how that technology can be used most effectively in order to do your job better. And the use of generative AI is at the forefront of that right now. Every individual should be looking at this and going, okay, what parts of my job, similar to the Wall Street Journal column, can be done by generative AI? And how do I upskill or skill in a complementary way so that I can still be involved in this profession if I like it and continue to add value, even though the technology is taking over certain parts of the job, because it's not going to replace full jobs. It's only, for the most part, it's only going to replace parts of jobs. And this goes for all jobs, by the way. I can't think of a single example right now where AI can completely replace a human being. There still needs to be substantial oversight. And that oversight has to be done by someone. And ideally, it's someone who did the job to begin with so that they they comprehend what needs to be done and how well the system is doing it. So it's this isn't actually an alarming thing, except for the fact, again, that there are going to people who don't, there are going to be people who don't who can't keep up, but that's always the truth with technology. And I think we just have to be looking out for those people and just try to pull them along as much as we can. Great question.
So another question about different technologies that was raised was, are you seeing more remote work or activity, the use of human using VR to control robots in remote locations? And
Yeah,
how might that impact work, especially dangerous work, like mining, for example, that you mentioned?
yeah. That, I mean, that is a fantastic example. And it's not one that I cited, but clearly you're familiar with the subject matter. And yes, this is the area where I think the metaverse is having the most immediate utility, or just virtual environments in general. It keeps people out of harm's way because you can be sitting at your computer, at your phone, be using a metaverse environment to see what the robot is doing, or even what the person is doing. If a person has to be there, then you're like the eye of God in a way. Like you can see all around, like what are some of the scenarios that the person is likely to encounter. But even better, maybe the other person's in the metaverse too, and the two of you are simulating a real world environment so that when that person does face that environment in real life, you've already come up with a whole bunch of contingencies and ways to fix certain things. So I think that is, from my perspective, the most immediate and most exciting benefit is that human safety will be protected because we can use robots or we can use simulations, but in a way that we know what's happening by the time a person is put into that environment. We have a much better sense of what's likely to go wrong and how we can combat any problems.
So another perspective on technology that was raised was the deep fake, and actually how it can be used to make the whole experience more immersive. So actually to mimic the people, to make it more personalized, more realistic.
Yeah, I like this topic. I mean, I'll be very transparent with you all. I have some pretty serious concerns as someone who does have intellectual property that is out there in the public domain. I sometimes worry about a deep fake being developed of myself, and just kind of being out there in the world saying whatever. And uh, I think that it can be used for good, absolutely, in the sense that, say you've always wanted to meet Taylor Swift and you weren't able to go to her concert, and you can go to the concert in the metaverse and you can meet a replication of Taylor Swift, and she can talk to you as if she would talk to you backstage, and it could feel very real. So I think there is, again, there's an entertainment and probably an educational benefit in this. There's just going to be a lot of intellectual property issues associated with this. Celebrities are definitely going to have an opinion. Some of them already do, expressing it publicly. In terms of where we are today, I mean, I know we're almost about out of time, but I want to tell you all a quick story, because this again really drives home the point that we're just not where we think we are with this stuff yet. I mean, deepfakes are possible, but they're not replacing entire humans yet. And I presented at a conference, a work tech conference, which is a global event. This particular one was in Chicago. And I partnered with an AI developer to develop a chatbot of myself. So the chatbot was called Lex. Lex consumed all of my books, all of my columns, anything that she could find online, and had almost my entire body of written knowledge in her algorithm. And then the audience of the conference asked Lex questions and asked me questions. I was there live. And we had a discussion about what were some of the differences. And the conclusion that the audience came to was having Lex was nothing like having me, in the sense that Lex would put certain concepts together that didn't quite go. If you had a cursory knowledge of the subject matter, it might kind of fly. But if you knew anything about it, you're like, oh, that's weird. That sounded strange. That doesn't really make sense. Those things don't connect. And also, Lex lacked nuance. She lacked anecdotes that I interspersed. So, for example, I just decided to intersperse that anecdote, but Lex wouldn't necessarily have known that, because this is something that happened in a real world environment that her algorithm wouldn't have picked up on. So tone is missing. So the bottom line is Lex could in no way replace the real version of me quite yet. Now, will this eventually happen? Maybe. I mean, I'm a futurist. Like, I got to look at all possibilities. It's definitely likely to get smarter and more sophisticated in the years to come, but we are not anywhere near there yet. So just be skeptical when you see these replications of real people, in terms of expecting them to be like the real person, because we're just not there from a technology perspective. And I don't know, some of us probably hope we never get there. We hope that the human spirit offers something unique that technology can't. But as a futurist, I can't tell you that won't happen. So it might, but right now we're not quite there yet.
I think these were wonderful closing words. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We still had so many questions, and this was super fascinating. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, we'll have to stop here. So thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. And you're more than welcome to join us in our next sessions every month. And we also have each month a geopolitical webinar, at least one. Obviously, it depends on what happens in the world. We had
Big
a
topic.
special, yeah, we had a special session for foreign policy in the US following Trump's election. So
Okay.
obviously this changes. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Alexandra. It was
You're
fascinating.
welcome. Great discussion. You want to reach out to me, alexandralevit.com. Would love to answer any of the questions we didn't get to, and look forward to communicating with you all and hearing about what you're seeing on the ground with respect to implementation of these technologies. That's how I get my knowledge, is by talking to people. So thanks so much. Keep in touch, and Wikistrat, thanks for having me.